How's it going, everybody? This is Brian for Pop Culture Crossing, and today we are talking about Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Now, this is the fourth and supposed final installment in the Uncharted action-adventure game series, and it was developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment America. Now, the Uncharted games follow Nathan Drake, a treasure hunter and sort of Indiana Jones type of character, as he explores exotic locations throughout the world in search of various artifacts and treasures. More often than not, these locations are often teeming with enemies vying for the same artifacts, and typically supernatural beings of some sort guard said treasure. Now, A Thief's End doesn't take place directly after the third game, Uncharted 3: Drake's Deception. Rather, it takes place several years after, where Nathan and his on-again, off-again relationship with Elena Fisher has seemed to mellowed out, and they are married. They have totally eschewed their old thrill-seeking lifestyle, and they have a more grounded, modest way of living. However, Nathan cannot help but still feel the allure and type of wanderlust for one last adventure. Now, things change when Sam, Nathan's long-lost brother, shows up and asks Nathan to help him find some pirate treasure in order so that he could repay a debt. So this complements Nathan's, desire to go on one last adventure, and he decides to help Sam, but keeps this decision a secret from Elena, a decision that could potentially really damage their already fickle and fragile relationship. Now, the Uncharted series as a whole is known for being, some of the best narrative video game experiences, and A Thief's End is no exception to this. Now, Naughty Dog's strong storytelling pedigree is very much still at play in A Thief's End, and the story is very superb, impressive, and unpredictable. And I say unpredictable, and this particularly stood out to me because I'm a fan of action-adventure movies, and as I played through the 3 other PlayStation Uncharted games, I found myself being able to predict pretty accurately how characters were going to act or how the story was going to unfold. And I was really surprised, and pleasantly so, that Uncharted 4 is more predictable, or more unpredictable rather, in that regard. Now, the stories and visuals, of course, are where A Thief's End is really at its strongest and where it shines. And both the story as well as visual elements are complemented by smaller elements that really augment the overall story. For example, journal entries, companion conversations, artifacts or notes found in a mansion, all help provide necessary exposition for the characters both in the present day as well as the story, which, centers around characters from several hundred years ago. Now, I personally really relish these moments as I learned more about the characters and tried to connect the dots on my own. The visuals just helped complement this, especially not only the various exotic locales, but particularly the parts in the mansion. I thought that was really cool and very well done. Now, in terms of gameplay, Thief's End has both good and bad elements, so we'll start with the good here. The climbing in Uncharted 4 is definitely the best and the most fluid of the series, and it features great, very subtle animations that help augment this. And most notably, it's like when you're climbing and Nathan kind of reaches his hand over, that's just felt very natural, and it felt like you had more than one way to go when you're climbing. In the previous games, it's pretty much like you're climbing and you can't go there, can't go there, can't go there, I guess we're going there. So it just gives you more, at least a sense of having more options and just a more natural, realistic feel when you climb. Also, there's an animation with Drake doing a little speed boost type of thing when he is either going up a hill like a road or upstairs, he'll kind of run a little bit faster. That's just a very natural human action. And seeing that in the gameplay really just helps, work for the positive in terms of immersion and realistic actions. Now, some of the climbing in this game actually reminded me of the Assassin's Creed series and the free form climbing there. And this was particularly evident in the case of the set piece in the fictitious city of Kings Bay. Now, I compare this to Assassin's Creed in a good way, because those games just are so free and open and have great climbing and parkour elements. Now, don't get me wrong here, Uncharted 4 is not open world, just free form climbing and parkour like Assassin's Creed, but compared to the other games in the series, it definitely feels like you have way more options and just fluidity in terms of the climbing controls and the animations. Now, the addition of the grappling hook is pretty good, though it does feel a bit cheesy having these set grappling targets kind of conveniently located or jutting out of pretty odd places. And, I actually do have a bit of a downside here. It would have been nice if some of these grappling targets, so you can only grapple onto specific things, you can't just use it whenever you want. You can only use it on these specific wooden, like, pieces of wood with rope tied around it. And it would have been really nice if Naughty Dog would have helped mask this or camouflage this per the environment in which Nathan is in at a given moment. It just feels very out of place if you're in a Scottish cave that presumably no one has been in for a long time, and you see this convenient, pieces of wood sticking out with a rope, and it's like, okay, cool. Also, when you're on a tropical island that seriously no one has been on for hundreds of years, and it's like, there's the same pieces of wood sticking out, and it's like, oh, I guess I have to use that and then swing around. They could have used other type of branches or rocks or something to help blend that better to make it feel more natural. Maybe they thought that would have been hard to do because you wouldn't have known necessarily where to use the grappling hook, but just in terms of having this one set animation or graphic asset for the grappling hook across all the environments kind of took me out of some of the immersion a little bit there. Now, my primary gameplay critique is revolving around the lack of the ability to throw grenades back at your enemies. So this combat mechanic was introduced in Uncharted 3, and it just helped the combat and the control scheme and gameplay there feel really refined and probably at the high point of the series. The controls had increasingly gotten better as the series has developed, and the lack of this element in Uncharted 4 really makes the controls and the combat seem really regressive and like it takes a step back. And especially, in terms of in the later portions of the game when you're in a tropical setting, I just found myself in certain parts getting pinned down by enemies, not really having a whole lot of area to move. I'm pinned down by enemy fire and I'm just getting pounded by their grenades. And this, especially in the tropical setting, really reminded me of the first game, Uncharted Drake's Fortune. And, having that type of a memory when you're in the fourth and supposed high point of the series just didn't set well with me, and it really just felt like they devolved the combat for A Thief's End. Another negative surrounding the gameplay was the over-reliance of crates, and particularly modern-looking crates with wheels and casters. So this crate mechanic is used very often throughout the game. You often have to push crates into certain locations in order to access higher ledges or higher areas. And, the majority of the assets for the crates are the same modern looking crates with these wheel casters. It would have been totally fine to use those in areas, and they did, where the adversaries had been before Drake. And it's like, oh, they just left this behind. That would have been totally fine. But when you're in, again, ruinous areas where no one has been for hundreds of years, and boom, there's this convenient crate with wheels that you can just, wheel around and get onto the ledges, that really took me out of the game. And I said this mechanic is used a lot. It happens very frequently, and it was like, man, I just wish that they would have, again, like the grappling targets, camouflaged this and used more environment appropriate items. There are a few times, however, probably in the third act of the game, where you use the same mechanic, but you're using old wooden, broken down wagons or carts or casks. And, that fits well. That blends well into the environment that Nathan is in at that time. But by and large, this mechanic and the aesthetic of it stick out in a negative way. And given the amount of detail that Naughty Dog put into the environments and just the sheer time and the beauty that they put into developing that, it's really disappointing that they didn't take a little bit more time and polish that and make that more realistic and more immersive. Another slight con, and this is more of a story geared con, was that the primary muscle antagonist of the game is this mercenary firm called Shoreline, and their leader is Nadine Ross. And this is very evocative of Uncharted 2 Among Thieves and the characters Lazarevich and his mercenary army there. And it kind of does really fall into this mercenary cliche. And, I was a bit disappointed that Naughty Dog seemed to recycle this element from, the second game. It's like we've kind of already seen this. Luckily, Ross and Shoreline aren't as predictable, and they do have slightly different development arcs than Lazarevich, but it's just luckily the story and the environments are very immersive, despite some of the minor story negatives that I have. It is very immersive, and I often just felt myself really wanting to completely explore the map at a given time. And it was pretty annoying, especially given the fact that the combat system is not particularly good here, that you'll be just exploring, finding notes or artifacts in these beautiful environments, and then all of a sudden, boom, a pillar gets blown up and all these Shoreline heavily armored mercenaries appear. And you're just like, really? I have to spend the next 5 minutes fighting these guys when I'd much rather be continuing to explore this area. So that was a bit disappointing, especially as you get into the third act of the game. It's just really like, oh my gosh, just let me soak in, these environments and not be interrupted by these obnoxious mercenary guys. And I was pretty disappointed that Naughty Dog seemed to kind of recycle that element from the second game. Now, the visuals in Uncharted 4 are not surprisingly gorgeous, as I've been talking throughout this review here. The environments and set pieces are very immersive and impressive, and I did spend a lot of time just wandering around, exploring, every nook and cranny. And just the attention to detail that I lightly mentioned before, rays of sun shining through the jungle, bright African vistas, autumnal Scottish highlands, and just the diversity of the locales is very refreshing. And, a lot of detail did go into constructing them. Thief's End, like the previous Uncharted games, features strong voice acting and motion capture. Now, Nolan North's Drake still has, a light and whimsical feel that made the character famous. And though his dialogue does have an added sense of realism to the situations and promotes his character development. And this is clear, in the fact that A Thief's End, this isn't Drake's first adventure. He's been on several adventures. He's kind of jaded in his perspective. He's not a wide-eyed, bushy-tailed explorer anymore. He knows that more often than not, when you go on these expeditions, you're either going to be disappointed, it's going to be like a wild goose chase, or something crazy is going to happen that, you wish never happened. So having this realistic interpretation of the sources and the facts and the approaches to the situation really showed that Drake has developed a lot as a character. And also Nolan North does a great job of showing and communicating the tug of war that Drake has in terms of emotions with his, his relationship and his new above board modest lifestyle with Elena, and then this tug of Sam and the allure of this last final grand adventure. Now, by the same token, Emily Rose's portrayal of Elena, still has a familiar tone and the same charm that made Elena famous in the previous games. And Rose, like North, does an expert job at communicating the emotional struggle and, tug of war between Drake and Elena. Now, Troy Baker's Sam is a fresh addition to the series. And in the first few hours of the game, I felt like I had known this character from previous games. This really made the Nathan-Sam relationship feel very realistic, and the brother chemistry was also great between them. He's very well introduced in the introductory section of the game, which uses, good use of flashbacks and exposition to really flesh out the character. And Sam, in my opinion, did not feel like he was just a character shoehorned into this installment. And Richard McGonigal's Sully, like Drake and Elena, is familiar yet fresh. And you can see that Sully's wisdom has really had a strong effect on Drake. And this is reflected, as I mentioned, talking about Drake, through his more realistic approach and kind of tempered expectations to, all the developments surrounding this treasure hunt. And here, you can just really see that Sully has had a strong influence on Drake over the years, and that has impacted Drake's growth as a character. Now, Laura Bailey's Nadine Ross and Warren Cole's Rafe Adler, Ross's employer and fellow treasure hunter, both also respectively deliver strong performances. Aside from the aforementioned, mercenary cliche, the characters are solid additions and antagonists to the story. And though there is this slight cliche, I was very pleased that they aren't as predictable as, past characters in the series. So Uncharted 4 features really one of the best epilogues and conclusions that I have experienced in video games, and the way that this game closes just really shows Naughty Dog's deep understanding of the Uncharted franchise and, what it means as a franchise to its fans. The great, satisfying ending, honestly, to me, it was a bit unexpected. I probably knew that they were going to do something, but just the way that it ended up playing out was pretty unexpected for me. But nevertheless, it's unmatched in terms of tone and delivery and just the way that they tie up this story. So overall, Uncharted 4: A Thief's End is my favorite installment in the series. And, though I do wish that the combat was better and, that some of the items, the grappling hook targets and the crates would have been, treated a little bit differently than it was in the final product. Regardless of those things, the story is very memorable. The characters and their development arcs are very well done and fleshed out. And the impressive visual fidelity and the rich environments just create a great balance that really helps Uncharted 4 stand on its own and really just stand as one of the best narrative experiences in video games to date. And I clearly highly recommend this to any fan of the series. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End definitely deserves a place in any PlayStation 4 owner's library. So, have you played Uncharted 4? If so, what was your favorite part of the game? Let me know in the comments below here, or hit me up on Twitter and we'll keep the conversation alive. If you've played all 4 of the games before, which I hope you have, where does Uncharted 4 lie in the rankings of the series? Let me know your overall series rankings and we'll keep the conversation going there. If you haven't played Uncharted 4 yet, but you're interested in it, what has been something that has really piqued your interest in this game or in the overall franchise? And, for those who have played the entire franchise, what is, one lasting memory that you have looking back on the series? Let me know your thoughts and your opinions in the comments or on Twitter. If you're interested, please check out a written, more detailed review at popculturecrossing.com. And as always, if you enjoyed this review, I appreciate it if you would share this with your friends and subscribe and spread the word. Thanks for watching. Bye.